What's up, night owls? Welcome back to Demon Sleep. Real quick, drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from tonight. I personally read every single one of them, and honestly, it makes my day seeing you all from around the world. If these dark tailies help you drift off or just escape reality for a bit, smash that like button and subscribe. But only if you think we've earned it. No pressure. Alright, lights off, rain on, blankets up. Let's dive into tonight's nightmare fuel. Exploding head syndrome. She turned on the light at 3:14 a.m. and looked at the corner of the room for 11 minutes without moving. The corner was empty. It was always empty. The sound had come from there, enormous, sourceless, detonating somewhere between her skull and the darkness, and when the paramedics arrived, she was still looking. She had been trying to fall asleep. To understand how we arrived here, we need to go back. Consider, if you possess the intellectual fortitude for such a consideration, the precise nature of the boundary between wakefulness and sleep. Not as metaphor, not as poetry, as what it actually is, a neurological threshold, a membrane of electrical activity, thin as the moment between heartbeats, across which the human brain passes each night with absolute trust and with no knowledge whatsoever of what waits on the other side. The ancient civilizations understood this more clearly than we do. The Egyptians called it Juet, the liminal region, the place between worlds. The Greeks spoke of Hypnos and Thanatos as brothers, twin sons of night, suggesting with a prescience we would do well to take more seriously that sleep and death are not merely similar states, but states that share the same dark geography. The Norse called the boundary Niflheim's edge. The Vedic traditions identified the hypnagogic state, that drowsing suspension before true sleep, as a moment of particular spiritual vulnerability, a crack in the self through which things from outside human experience might pass. These traditions predate our neuroscience by thousands of years. They predate our clinical language by millennia. And what is remarkable, what I find remarkable, though I am well past the point where the word remarkable carries any comfort, is that what they described, and what our electroencephalograms now confirm, agree on one central, disturbing point. The moment you begin to fall asleep, your brain briefly loses its ability to distinguish between internal and external reality. The auditory cortex continues firing. The prefrontal cortex, the rational supervisor, steps partially away. What remains is something older, something that predates the higher functions by evolutionary epochs, something that has been listening for danger in the dark since long before human beings had words for anything at all. It is this ancient architecture, this primordial surveillance system hardwired into the base of every human brain, that is responsible for what some call, with a clinical casualness I find either admirably detached or profoundly inadequate, exploding head syndrome. That is its name, given to it in 1988 by British neurologist J.M.S. Pierce, who documented recurring cases with all the careful precision of a man who has encountered something he cannot fully account for and has chosen, wisely, to describe the shape of the whole rather than guess at what made it. The syndrome itself, if we can call it a syndrome, if we can gather these events under a single clinical roof without losing what is most disturbing about each individual case, involves the generation, by the human brain, of a sound of extraordinary volume, a sound with no external source whatsoever, a sound that arrives at the precise moment of hypnagogic transition, that threshold, that membrane, that crack in the self, and announces itself with the force of something that has been waiting on the other side for a very long time. What generates it precisely, the neurological literature cannot agree upon. Some propose cortical spreading depression. Others point to misfiring in the auditory brainstem. Others still suggest the reticular formation, that ancient reptilian structure deep in the brainstem, is involved. They are all looking at the same shadow from different angles and nomming it differently. What none of them have named, what none of them, to my knowledge, have attempted to address in the clinical literature, is the documented and replicated finding that in 42% of recurring cases, the sound does not appear to originate from inside the skull at all. It comes from the room, specifically from a corner of the room, from the doorway, from the space beside the bed, from the same location every time. The ancient watchers at the threshold knew this. They built entire mythological systems around the knowledge that the moment of sleep was a moment of opening, and that not everything that passed through that opening was a product of the mind alone. The neurologists have a name for the sound. They do not yet have a name for what makes it. This is the story of a woman named Rachel, who had a melatonin prescription and a podcast she liked, and a Wednesday that was already going badly before it got worse. And it is the story of something that found her in the dark, in that precise, unguarded moment between one breath and the next, and has not entirely let her go. It is also your story, whether you know it yet or not. 10% of the population will experience this at least once. The room you are in right now will be dark when you try to sleep tonight. The threshold between waking and dreaming will open, as it always does, exactly when you stop paying attention. Whatever waits, there has been waiting for a very long time. The house was quiet when she came home. The lights were on. She did not remember leaving the lights on. Rachel Elms was 34 years old, and she was worried about a performance review. That's where this starts. Not with something cosmic, not with something ancient, with a performance review at a mid-sized marketing consultancy on the 14th floor of a building in Columbus, Ohio, that had a coffee machine in the break room that made a sound like a cat sneezing and fluorescent lights that hummed at a frequency that you only noticed when the office was otherwise quiet, which it sometimes was, late on Tuesday afternoons. Rachel was good at her job. She knew she was good at her job. Her manager, a man named Dennis who wore khakis in a way that made you feel slightly sorry for khakis, had given her nothing but positive feedback for 3 years. There was, objectively speaking, nothing to worry about. Rachel's brain had not gotten that memo. She was the kind of person who worried in advance about things that were probably fine. The kind of person who lay awake at 2 a.m. running through worst-case scenarios with the dedicated efficiency of someone who has been doing it their whole life and has accepted it as a personality feature rather than a flaw. She described it once to her friend Mara as being a pilot who only thinks about crashes. Mara had laughed. Rachel had laughed too. It was funny when it was daytime. She drove home on October 14th, a Wednesday, in the specific kind of October dark that Columbus does, that flat Midwestern dark that comes down early and without drama, like a lid being put on a pot. She stopped at a Walgreens. She bought a box of melatonin 5 mg gummies, the kind that taste like artificial cherry and make you feel slightly guilty, like eating candy and calling it medicine, which is essentially what you are doing, and a container of Greek yogurt that she would eat half of before deciding she wasn't hungry. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building with a parking garage that smelled like cold concrete and old motor oil, the specific smell of winter arriving whether you want it or not. She took the stairs. She always took the stairs. She was the kind of person who took the stairs and felt a little virtuous about it, which is also, she knew, a personality feature rather than a virtue. She ate the yogurt. She answered 3 emails she didn't need to answer tonight but answered anyway because not answering them would have required actively choosing not to answer them, which required more mental energy than just answering. She scrolled for a while. She texted Mara, "Review tomorrow, anxious, normal level though." Mara texted back, "You've got this, Dennis loves you. Also, can you bring me a coffee tomorrow?" Rachel put the phone face down on the nightstand. She took 1 melatonin gummy. She thought about taking 2, decided 1 was sufficient, thought about it again, took the second one anyway. She put on You're Wrong About, an episode she'd already heard, the one about the satanic panic, which she found oddly soothing because it was frightening but historically resolved, frightening in a way that had an ending. And she turned the lights off and she lay in the dark with her phone face down on the nightstand, and the podcast going quietly, and the October dark outside the window where the streetlight made a thin orange seam along the edge of the curtain. She wasn't asleep, but she was getting there, that warm, loose feeling. The one where thoughts start coming in sideways, not quite your own thoughts anymore, the edges softening, and the anxiety about the performance review was still there, but it was at a distance now, like a fire on the other side of a hill. You could see the glow, but you couldn't feel the heat. She was almost there. She was maybe 30 seconds from being completely under when she heard the sound that changed things. She would later tell a sleep specialist named Dr. Yoon that it was like a gunshot. Then she would say, no, it wasn't like a gunshot, because she'd never actually heard a gunshot except in movies, and movies lie about what gunshots sound like. It was more like, and here she would pause for a while, looking at the middle distance, it was more like a speaker blowing out. The way a sound system destroys itself when the volume goes beyond what the hardware was built for. Except the speaker was her brain, and the volume had gone somewhere it was never built to go. She sat up. She did it fast, the way your body moves before your brain has caught up, pure animal reflex, the startle response, 2 million years of evolution pulling her vertical before she knew why. The podcast was still playing. The orange line of streetlight was still along the curtain. The apartment was completely, totally, ordinarily quiet. Rachel sat in the dark for a long moment, heart going, and thought, what the hell was that? She checked the street. She checked the door. She opened the bedroom window and listened and heard nothing except a car 3 blocks away and faintly someone's television. She lay back down. She told herself it was a dream. Half asleep, drifting, you get sounds sometimes. She'd heard of that. Your brain misfires. She'd heard a noise from the podcast and her dreaming mind had amplified it. That was the rational explanation, and she was a rational person, and the rational explanation was sufficient. She lay back down. She was almost asleep again. Maybe 20 minutes later, the melatonin doing its work, the warmth coming back, when she noticed, not quite consciously, that she was listening harder than she needed to. Listening specifically toward the corner to the left of the bedroom door, where the hamper was, and a reading lamp she never used, and a stack of books she kept meaning to get to. She didn't know why she was listening toward the corner. She made herself stop. She went asleep. Here is what you need to know about Rachel Elms. She grew up in Findlay, Ohio, which is a town that exists in the specific way that middle Ohio towns exist, completely, without apology, full of its own internal logic and geography that means nothing to anyone who didn't grow up there and means everything to everyone who did. Her parents were teachers, both of them. Her father taught high school history and was the kind of teacher who was actually interested in what he was teaching, which made him unusual enough that students remembered him for decades after. Her mother taught 4th grade and had a voice that made you feel immediately that things were going to be okay, even when they weren't. Rachel was an only child, which shaped her in the way being an only child shapes you, a specific relationship with solitude, more comfortable in her own company than most people, a reader from early, good at entertaining herself. She had a close friend in elementary school named Jamie who moved away in 6th grade, and whom she still thought about occasionally in the way you think about people who got cut from the story before the interesting parts started. She'd gone to Ohio State, studied communications, graduated middle of her class, not because she wasn't smart. She was smart. She's always been smart, the kind of quietly smart that doesn't advertise itself, but because she spent her junior year primarily focused on a person named Marcus, who was a guitarist in a band that was genuinely pretty good, and who turned out to be kind but not particularly interested in the future, which is its own variety of heartbreak. She moved to Columbus after graduation. She had meant to move somewhere more interesting, New York, Chicago, one of the cities that felt like they had something to prove. But Columbus had a job offer and a friend of a friend with a room in a decent apartment, and the city had this quality of being manageable, of being sized for actual human beings, and she told herself she'd stay a year and had now stayed 8. She liked her apartment. She'd painted the bedroom a dark sage green that had taken her 3 weekends and 4 different paint swatches to get right, and the result was a room that felt like being inside something intentional, which was what she'd been going for. She had a plant on the windowsill, a pothos, nearly unkillable, currently thriving despite occasional neglect, and a print of a hopper painting above the dresser, and a rug her mother had helped her pick out at a crate and barrel in a Columbus suburb, where the parking lot seemed specifically designed to produce existential unease. It was her room, it was hers. She'd made it hers over 8 years the way you make a place yours, slowly, through the accumulation of small decisions and good enough furniture and things that didn't match, but somehow worked together. She felt safe in that room. She had always felt safe in that room. The performance review on Thursday morning went fine. Dennis sat across from her with his khakis and his performance metrics and his printout of the evaluation form, and he told her, essentially, what she had already known. She was good at her job. She would be getting a raise that was not spectacular but was respectable. He was glad she was on the team. He used the word synergy once, as managers who use the word synergy always do, without seeming to know what it sounds like from the outside. Rachel smiled and thanked him and went back to her desk and texted Mara. It was fine, totally fine. I knew it would be fine. Mara texted back, I told you. Also, you owe me a coffee. Rachel got Mara a coffee from the machine that sounded like a cat sneezing, which Mara accepted with the graciousness of someone receiving an offering they had expected. That night, Thursday night, Rachel went home and cooked actual dinner, pasta with a sauce from a jar, which she dressed up with fresh garlic and a little white wine and felt good about, and watched 2 episodes of a show she was 3 seasons behind on, and went to bed at 11 without any particular anxiety and fell asleep almost immediately. She woke at 2:47 a.m. Not the explosion, not yet. She woke up the normal way, groggily, confused, needing the bathroom. She went to the bathroom. She came back. She lay down and looked at the ceiling. The room was quiet. The sage green walls were dark. The pothos was a shadow on the windowsill. The streetlight made its thin orange line along the edge of the curtain. She was almost back asleep when she became aware that she was looking at the corner again. The same corner, the left corner by the door. There was nothing there. There was never anything there. The hamper, the lamp, the books, the ordinary geometry of a room she'd lived in for 4 years. She looked at it anyway for longer than she needed to, feeling a faint, unspecific unease that she could not have pointed at in a police lineup. And then she looked away and went back to sleep. The second detail that didn't fit, still small, still ignorable. She ignored it. The next time it happened was Saturday night, and Rachel was more prepared for it than she should have been. Which is a strange thing to say. You can't really prepare for a sound that doesn't exist. But she'd spent Friday night lying in the dark, falling asleep, noticing that she was braced. Not for anything specific, just generally braced, the way you are when you've had one strange thing happen, and you're waiting to find out if it was a one-time thing or the beginning of something. Braced is actually worse than scared. Scared is at least honest about what it is. Braced is just low-grade hypervigilance wearing a normal face. Braced is your nervous system going to work overtime without telling you what it's working on. She told herself rationally that what had happened Wednesday night was a hypnic jerk. Those were the words she'd looked up on her phone Thursday at lunch, eating a sad desk salad and quietly Googling her own brain. Hypnic jerk, hypnagogic sound, hearing noise while falling asleep. She'd gone down a gentle Wikipedia rabbit hole that had reassured her more than it probably should have. The brain generates sounds and sensations at sleep onset. It is normal and common and has a range of boring neurological explanations. There was even a specific term, exploding head syndrome, which was alarming in exactly the way its name implied, but which was, the Wikipedia article assured her, benign. Benign, she'd clung to that word. A benign thing. A strange thing that meant nothing, changed nothing, would not harm her. Friday night she'd gone to bed at 11:30 and lain there waiting for the sound, and it hadn't come. And by midnight she'd relaxed into genuine tiredness and slept through until 7:15 and woken up feeling fine and slightly embarrassed about having been anxious in the first place. Saturday she went to a farmer's market with Mara in the morning and found a local bakery selling croissants that were genuinely exceptional, which became the conversational centerpiece of the next 2 hours. And in the afternoon she cleaned the apartment and reorganized the bookshelf and felt productive and good. She talked to her mother on the phone for 40 minutes. She ordered Thai food for dinner. She watched a movie. She was tired in a clean, satisfying way, the tiredness of a good day fully used. She went to bed at 11. She was asleep by 11:15. She woke at 2:19 a.m. to the sound. Bigger than Wednesday. That was the first thought that actually made it through. Not what was that, but bigger. The comparison happening before the analysis. The brain grating it against the previous event with a speed that suggested it had been anticipating exactly this. It was bigger and it was closer, and it had a quality that Wednesdays had not had, something directional, something spatial, not just a sound, but a sound from somewhere. She sat up, heart going. The room was quiet, the sage green dark, the pothos shadow on the sill. And then her eyes went to the corner. Not because she decided to look at the corner, because they went there on their own, the way eyes go to movement even before the conscious mind registers that movement has occurred. Some older, faster part of her brain had already triangulated the direction of the sound and sent the message, and her eyes arrived at the corner before she'd consciously chosen to look. The corner was empty. Of course it was empty. The hamper, the lamp, its shade a slightly dusty cream. The books, Anne Patchett on top, she'd been meaning to read it since February. Ordinary, entirely ordinary. It came from there, some part of her said, and immediately another part said, no, it came from inside your head, like the last time, like Wikipedia said, benign. She sat in the dark for maybe 5 minutes, which felt like longer, and her heart gradually did what hearts do, slowed down, stood down, returned to its regular service with the practiced calm of an EMT who has seen worse. She lay back down. She did not fall back asleep for a long time. At some point, lying there in the dark with her eyes aimed at the ceiling rather than the corner with specific, deliberate effort, she had the thought that was the beginning of the real problem. What if Wikipedia is wrong about it being benign? Not what if this is something serious. That thought, the medical anxiety version, she could handle. She'd had medical anxiety before. You call the doctor, you get checked out, you establish that you are not dying. The thought that lodged was smaller and more specific. What if benign is the wrong word for what this is? Which is not the same thing, not at all. She called her doctor on Monday. Dr. Singh was her GP, a patient woman with reading glasses that she wore on a chain around her neck in a way that should have looked old-fashioned but didn't, with a practice in a medical building 2 blocks from Rachel's office that smelled of industrial cleaning products, and had a fish tank in the waiting room that nobody had cleaned in what appeared to be months. Rachel liked her. She had what Rachel's mother would call a good presence, the quality of making you feel like you had her complete, genuine attention, which is rarer in medicine than it should be. She described the 2 incidents. Dr. Singh listened with the reading glasses held loosely in one hand. She asked a few questions: frequency, duration, any visual component, pain level, none. The sound was always purely sound, enormous and gone. History of sleep disorders, history of anxiety. And here Rachel made the face she always made at that question, the slight eyebrow raise that meant, well, yes, as we have discussed at some length. Dr. Singh told her what Wikipedia had told her: exploding head syndrome, hypnagogic, extremely common, benign. She used the word benign 3 times. Rachel counted. She said it could happen more frequently under stress, which explained the Wednesday onset, the anxious day, the melatonin, the heightened nervous system finding the threshold at exactly the wrong moment. She said the vast majority of people who experienced it had it occasionally and never had it become a significant issue. What about people for whom it does become significant? Rachel asked. Dr. Singh looked at her for a moment. In a small number of cases, it recurs more frequently, usually resolves on its own. There's not a lot of treatment protocol because it's benign. Because it's generally not harmful, yes. Rachel drove back to work. She sat at her desk. She had, technically, nothing to worry about. She had a name for the thing. She had a doctor who was not alarmed. She had a Wikipedia article and a medical opinion and a neurological explanation. She opened a new browser tab and searched. Exploding head syndrome, corner of the room, same location. She stared at the results for a while. She closed the tab. She opened it again. She would make one more choice before this became something she couldn't make choices about anymore. That night she rearranged her bedroom, moved the bed from the left wall to the right wall, so the corner, the one with the hamper and the lamp and the Patchett novel, was now behind her when she slept, not in her line of sight, not the first thing her eyes would find if she woke suddenly in the dark. It was a logical thing to do. It was the kind of thing a rational person does with a small, manageable fear. She thought of it as environmental modification, like moving the candy bowl away from the couch, like putting her phone charger in another room. You change the context so the context stops triggering the thing. She remade the bed. She moved the nightstand and the lamp. She stood in the newly arranged room and it looked fine, looked good, actually. The bed in the new position caught the morning light in a better way. She went to sleep that night with the corner behind her. At 3:14 a.m., the sound came from directly behind her head. Still from the corner, the same corner. She turned on every light in the apartment and sat in the kitchen until it was light outside. And here is the part nobody talks about, the part left out of every news report, every official account, every interview, because the people who knew, the ones who were actually there, made a decision. They decided some things were better left unsaid. They were wrong, and tonight you're going to hear why. He told himself it was nothing. The house had been telling him the same thing for 3 days. Houses lie. The apartment was quiet on Monday morning. Rachel had not moved the furniture back. She'd considered it and decided not to. The decision had a logic to it that she didn't examine too closely. If the sound was going to come from the corner regardless of where she put the bed, then the corner was the variable that mattered, not the bed. She did not pursue this logic to its end. She went to work. She came home. She made dinner. She watched television. She did the things she always did in the order she always did them, which was its own kind of armor. The pothos on the windowsill needed watering. She watered it. The stack of books on the corner floor, she'd left them there when she moved the bed. Somehow she'd moved everything else and left the books, had a fine layer of dust on Ann Patchett's face. She noticed this and did not move the books. She was not sure why. She told herself she'd do it later. She went to bed at 10:30. She woke at 7. There had been no sound in the night. She had slept through. She felt the relief, and then, underneath the relief, something smaller and more unsettling. She had checked the corner first thing upon waking. Not looked at it, checked it. The word checked with its implication of surveillance, of monitoring, of watching something you are not fully certain stays still when you aren't looking. The corner was what it was, the books on the floor, the lamp turned off, the hamper with 2 items of laundry in it that needed washing. She made coffee. She called Mara. They talked for 20 minutes about Mara's new person, someone named Felix who was apparently very funny and also owned an impressive collection of vintage cookbooks. And Rachel listened and asked the right questions. and felt the normality of the conversation like something solid underfoot. She did not mention the corner. She did not know how she would have mentioned the corner. "There's this corner in my bedroom," she might have said, and Mara would have said, "What about it?" and Rachel would have said nothing. Really, it's just a corner, and that would have been accurate technically. It was just a corner. It was a structural feature of a room she'd lived in for 4 years. Corners exist in rooms. This was not news. On Wednesday evening, she noticed that the reading lamp in the corner was off. She had not turned it off. She had not, to her knowledge, turned it on. She stood in the doorway of the bedroom and looked at it for a long time. The lamp was not plugged in. She had unplugged it during the furniture rearrangement and had not plugged it back in. It had not been on. It could not have been on and then off. It had been off all along. She knew this. She stood in the doorway for another moment anyway. She called her mother on Thursday. Not to say anything specific, just to hear the voice. Good presence, that was the thing. Her mother's voice had it over the phone as much as in person. This quality of making you feel that things were manageable even when your evidence suggested otherwise. They talked for 40 minutes. Her father was redoing the deck. Her mother's book club had chosen something Rachel would not have chosen, but she listened to the plot summary with genuine interest. Normal things. The world being normal and full of normal things. After she hung up, she sat on the couch for a while, in a silence that felt different from the usual kind. She had not told her mother about the sound. She had not told Mara. She had not told anyone except Dr. Singh, who had said benign 3 times and moved on to the next patient. It was not that it was a secret. It was just that every time she tried to locate the words for it, the words came out wrong. Too small. I've been hearing things at night. Too large. Something is wrong with my apartment. Too clinical. I have a documented parasomnia. And the thing she actually wanted to say, the thing underneath all the other things, was something she didn't have words for at all. She was afraid to fall asleep. Not of the sound itself. She'd had the sound 4 times now, and it had not hurt her, had left no mark, had produced nothing she could point to except a heart rate in some lost sleep. The sound was, as Dr. Singh had said, benign. She was afraid of the moment before the sound. That specific moment, the drifting, the warm looseness, the edges softening, which had been for 34 years the most reliably safe moment in any given day. The approach to sleep, the surrender, the point at which you trust your own body completely and let go. She was afraid of that moment because in that moment now, something happened, and she didn't fully believe anymore that the something was coming from inside her head. The books were still on the corner floor. She had not moved them. She went to bed at 11. She lay in the dark with the corner behind her and the October dark outside and the streetlight's thin orange line along the curtain. At 3:14 a.m. exactly, she had looked at the clock. The sound came from the corner, and just before it came, in the half-second before the detonation, she heard something that had not been there before. Something that was not quite sound and not quite silence, and was lower than either, and seemed to be breathing. What you just heard was only the beginning. She did not tell Dr. Singh about the breathing. She told herself this was because it would sound irrational, which it would, but that was not actually the reason. The reason was that numbing it, putting the word breathing in a clinical context, watching it become a symptom in someone's notes, would make it something that had happened, something real and documented. And as long as she hadn't said it out loud, it was still only a thing she wasn't sure of. She was very sure of it. She began sleeping with the light on. Not all the lights, just the small lamp on the nightstand, the one she'd moved from the corner, the one that had been unplugged. She brought it across the room and plugged it into the outlet by the bed and turned it to its lowest setting, which made the room amber rather than dark. The amber light made the shadows different. It made the corner fully visible. The corner was exactly what it was, a corner of a room. The hamper, the books on the floor, the space where the unplugged lamp base had sat, the small circle of floor that had been underneath it. which was slightly darker than the surrounding floor in a way that meant nothing and should not have been notable, and which she noticed every morning when she woke up. She started sleeping on fewer hours. Not intentionally. She would go to bed at a reasonable time and lie there not quite crossing the threshold, keeping one foot on the bank, so to speak, not fully surrendering to the drifting. And at some point, exhaustion would simply take her over her own resistance and she'd be asleep. And then she'd be awake, and the clock would say something between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. and the amber light would show her the corner, which was always what it was. She lost 6 pounds in 2 weeks. Her coworker James asked if she'd done something different. She said she'd been cooking more. James said it looked good, and she said thank you, and she went to the bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror and thought she looked like someone running low on something essential. On a Sunday in late October, she moved the books away from the corner. She stood the corner completely empty except for the hamper. Clean floor, nothing. That night the sound did not come. On Monday it came 3 times before 4 a.m. She was awake for all of them. One sentence, plain, impossible to explain away. By November, she had started sleeping with the door open and the hall light on, and she had pushed her bed as far from the corner as the room's dimensions would allow, and the corner looked exactly like a corner, and she could not make herself stop watching it. She noticed it on a Tuesday. 3 days later, it had a name in a police report. October 1988, London, England, case file, PERC EHS 8081. JMS Pierce, consulting neurologist, University of Hull. First formal clinical paper, Exploding Head Syndrome, published in The Lancet, October 22, 1988. 50 cases documented. 50 people who had described the same thing to the same doctor. They were not patients who had sought him out for this specifically. They had come in for other complaints. And in the course of taking their history, in that clinical space where doctors ask about other symptoms, anything else unusual, they had admitted to the sound. Admitted, that is the word that comes up in Pierce's own notes. The patient admitted to the sensation, as if it were something to be ashamed of. They had not told their GPs. They had not told their families. They had heard the sound in the dark at the moment of sleep, enormous and sourceless and terrifying, and they had gotten up, and they had checked the apartment, and they had found nothing, and they had gone back to bed, and they had not mentioned it to anyone because they believed, every single one of them, that mentioning it would confirm what they feared, that they were losing their mind. Pierce gave it a name. Named things are containable, or so the logic goes. Margaret Holloway, 58, retired schoolteacher, Leeds, documented 1991. I heard it first in 1987, just the once, I thought. Then it happened again. Then it was every week. My husband slept through everything the man could sleep through the second coming. I never woke him. I thought I was going mad, genuinely going mad. The sound was so enormous, I used to think if it was real, the windows would have broken. And they never did. And that was somehow worse. That nothing broke. That I was the only thing shaken. End witness account. Margaret Holloway was diagnosed with exploding head syndrome by Pierce in 1991. She reported experiencing it approximately 300 times over 12 years before it resolved spontaneously. November 2015, Washington State University, study, SHARPLESS 2015. Brian Sharpless, clinical psychologist, published the most comprehensive contemporary study of EHS prevalence. 18.4% of college students had experienced it at least once, more than 1 in 6. In cases of clinical populations, people already experiencing anxiety or sleep disruption, the number climbed to 28%. The sound itself, across documented cases, described with consistent detail across different countries, different decades, different populations. A gunshot, a thunderclap, a cymbal crash, a bomb detonation, an explosion of unknown type, always percussive, always singular, always massive, always without external source. Duration instantaneous, no echo, The sound arrives and is already gone. Location of apparent origin. In primary cases, perceived as internal inside the skull behind the eyes. But in 42% of recurring cases, documented across multiple studies, perceived as external, specifically coming from the room. From a corner, a doorway, the space beside the bed. Always the same location. The study notes this finding with academic caution. It does not theorize about the consistency of location. It notes it. It notes it and moves on. The fact that exists in the literature and has never been adequately explained. In recurring EHS cases involving perceived external origin, the location is described identically by patients who have never communicated with each other, who live in different cities, who have no shared cultural reference for the phenomenon. The same corner, the same location every time. This is on record. March 2019, Portland, Oregon. Daniel Katz, 29, graphic designer. Single occupancy apartment, Northwest District. Experienced first EHS episode during a period of work-related stress following a major project deadline. Documented in a sleep clinic intake form. First episode perceived internal, standard presentation. Second episode, 11 days later, perceived external from the closet. Third episode, 3 days after that, same location. Episodes 4 through 9, same closet, always at sleep onset. By the 7th episode, Daniel Katz had removed everything from the closet. He slept with the closet door open and the light on inside it. By the 9th episode, he had begun sleeping in the living room. Daniel Katz, 29, graphic designer, Portland, Oregon, 2019. I know how it sounds, I know. The doctors told me exactly what it was, the auditory cortex, the hypnagogic state, I looked it all up, okay? I know the science. And I'm telling you, the science doesn't explain why it was always the closet. Always the exact same position, about 2 feet inside the door, above eye level. I moved apartments. The new apartment, different building, different neighborhood, and on the 4th night the sound came from the closet. The same position. 2 feet inside, above eye level. I live without closet doors now. I don't use closets. End witness account. Daniel Katz was subsequently referred to a sleep specialist and a therapist. He reports the frequency of episodes has diminished. He still does not use closets. He declined to be contacted for follow-up. June 2020, BIRMINGHAM UK. Case reference, Sleep Clinic BIRMINGHAM City Hospital. Patient F, female, 41. Nurse. First episode during a period of extended night shifts during the first year of the COVID-19 pandemic. Occupational and circadian stress factors noted. Episodes escalated from once monthly to 3 per night over a period of 8 weeks. Clinical notes. Patient reports episodes occurring always from the same quadrant of the room, specifically the space adjacent to the bedroom window. Patient has covered the window with blackout curtains and a secondary layer of blanking material. No clinical improvement in frequency noted. Patient F's last recorded clinical appointment, November 2020. She did not return for scheduled follow-up. The clinic notes this as a likely treatment dropout, common in cases without pharmacological intervention. They left it at that. Her GP received a letter in December 2020 informing him that patient F had moved. New address, her parents' home, 60 miles from Birmingham. She was 41 years old and she had moved into her childhood bedroom. She left no notes on why. The mythology of the threshold is older than every name we have given it. Every major spiritual tradition in recorded human history maintains some variation of the same belief. The moment of sleep is a moment of danger, not because sleep itself is dangerous, because the door opens. The Japanese concept of kanashibari, sleep paralysis, and its accompanying supernatural visitation has been documented in Japanese literature since the 8th century. The entity visits at night, during the approach to sleep, and stands at the foot of the bed or beside it. The position varies. It is always in the room. The old hag tradition of Newfoundland, a creature that sits on the sleeper's chest, arriving in the moment between waking and sleeping, pressing the breath out of the body. Not a dream figure, a presence that is in the room. The shadow people phenomenon, reported cross-culturally, described consistently as figures seen during hypnagogic transition, perceived as inhabiting specific areas of the room, corners, doorways, the space beside the bed, not moving, watching. Every culture has a version. Every version shares the same geography. The figure is in the room in a specific location, and that location is always the same. Dr. Ifoma Osei, folklorist and comparative religion scholar, University of Edinburgh, 2022. What strikes me about the cross-cultural consistency is not the entity descriptions, those vary enormously, but the spatial consistency. The location, the corner, the threshold. Whatever these traditions are encoding, they agree on where it stands. Neurologists will tell you this consistency is explained by the architecture of the hypnagogic brain. The visual cortex, partially active at sleep onset, generates shapes in low-light conditions. The perceptual system, seeking pattern and ambiguity, locates those shapes in the areas of the room that are already producing mild spatial processing, angles, thresholds, the meeting of planes. The corner, the doorway, the space beside the bed. This is the neurological explanation. It is coherent. It is testable. It does not explain why. In Rachel Elms's apartment in Columbus, Ohio, the sound came from the corner before she knew which corner it was. She moved the furniture. The sound followed. She removed the furniture. The sound stayed. She watched the corner with the lights on, and the room entirely visible. The corner was empty. The sound came from the corner on October 24th, November 3rd, November 8th, November 8th again, November 9th 3 times, November 9th a 4th time. November 9th, a Tuesday, the 4th event of that night. Rachel Elms sat up in bed, turned on the light, looked at the corner. And the corner looked back. What I am about to tell you is documented. It is on record. It exists in files that are technically public but practically inaccessible. I found them. I read every page. You need to hear what is inside, because what happened once is still happening. The file ends there. What it cannot record is what happened inside Rachel's chest when she read it, the specific weight of knowing that someone had survived this before her and told no one. She found the sharpless study at 1 in the morning, lying in bed with her phone and the nightstand lamp on, and the hall light on and the bedroom door open. She read it the way you read things at 1 a.m. when you are scared, fast and not quite absorbing, going back over sentences that blurred, trying to find the number, the specific thing that would either make it worse or make it better. 18.4% prevalence, more than 1 in 6 people. This should have been comforting. There is safety in company. She read it again. She found the 42% figure, the external location, the consistent corner, the cross-study replication. And she sat with that number for a while in the amber light of the nightstand lamp. 42% of recurring sufferers, not an anomaly, not a misremembering, documented, replicated, named in the study in language so careful it screamed. And then she went looking for the thing the studies didn't say, the thing between the data points. She went to forums, read it first, then a sleep disorder support community, then a paranormal experiences board she felt slightly embarrassed about visiting but visited anyway, because by now she was past the point of caring what the source was as long as it had what she needed. The forums were full of people like her. Not crazy, not dramatic, not people seeking validation for beliefs they already held. People describing with the specific precision of those who have tried multiple times to say something and keep getting it wrong, the same thing. The sound, the location, the consistency. It's always the same corner one person wrote. I've had this for 3 years. I moved twice. It found the corner in every apartment. The sound isn't what scares me, another wrote. The sound is just a sound. What scares me is the way the room feels just before it, like something adjusted, like something shifted into position. My therapist says it's anxiety-generated hypnagogic acoustics, a third wrote. She's not wrong, but she's never asked me why the sound is always from the same spot on the same wall regardless of where my bed is. Rachel read until 3 a.m. She stopped reading because her eyes hurt, and because continuing to read felt like doing something to herself that she shouldn't be doing to herself. She put the phone face down on the nightstand. She lay in the amber light and she thought, with a clarity that was worse than confusion, I am not going to be able to sleep in this apartment. And then, I am not going to be able to tell anyone why. And then underneath that, the thing she'd been not quite thinking since October 14th and could no longer avoid. It isn't in my head. The thought arrived without drama. It settled. It took up the space that had been being kept for it. It isn't in my head. Or it is in my head, yes, I know it is. The neuroscience is clear about the mechanism. But the mechanism is not the whole story. Something is using the mechanism. Something found the door. She turned off the light. She sat in the dark for a moment, actually in the dark, the nightstand lamp off, just the hall light coming through the open door. She looked at the corner. The corner was dark now, darker than the rest of the room, the meeting of walls making a shadow that the hall light didn't quite reach. She turned the nightstand light back on. Her sister called from Phoenix on November 12th. Rachel doesn't have a sister, but Mara called Mara, who was the closest thing she had to a sister. Mara, who had known her since grad school and who had the specific talent of genuine friends for knowing when something was wrong before being told. And the conversation started normally, about Felix and his cookbooks and Mara's work and the parking situation near Mara's office. And then Mara said, "Okay, what's actually going on?" Rachel almost said nothing. The word was right there. She could have said it and changed the subject, and Mara would have pushed back once and then let it go, because that was the agreement they had, the implicit understanding between people who respect each other's privacy. She said, "I've been having trouble sleeping." And Mara said, "What kind of trouble?" And Rachel said, "A thing happens, a sound." And Mara said, "What kind of sound?" And Rachel told her the whole thing. October 14th through November 12th, the melatonin and the podcast and the explosion, Dr. Singh and Wikipedia and the word benign, the forum posts, the 42% figure, the corner, moving the furniture and the sound following, sleeping with the light on, not quite crossing the threshold. She'd been in the kitchen, packing slightly the way she did on the phone when the conversation required physical movement to process. She stopped packing halfway through and sat down at the kitchen table. She talked for a long time. Mara didn't interrupt, which was its own form of respect. Mara was a person who interrupted. In the best way, the way of engagement rather than impatience. And not interrupting was her way of saying, "I'm taking this seriously." When Rachel finished, Mara said, "That sounds genuinely terrifying." "It is. And I know it's not rational, it's a sleep thing, it's documented." "Rachel, it doesn't have to be supernatural to be terrifying. The sound is real, it wakes you up. It's happening every night. That's terrifying regardless of the cause." Rachel exhaled, the sound of being believed. "Thank you. Can you come stay? Come to Phoenix for a while, sleep somewhere different." "I'm not going to run from my apartment." "Why not?" "After false safety, then fast." "Because," Rachel said and stopped. And Mara said, "Because what?" And Rachel said, "Because I don't think it's the apartment." She hadn't said that out loud before. She hadn't even fully formed it in her own mind before she said it. It came out of her mouth as though it had been waiting for the right person to say it to. 3 days later, On November 15th, she slept at Mara's apartment. Mara had driven up from Cincinnati for a conference and had a hotel room and gave Rachel the key and told her to stay as long as she needed. Rachel slept 7 hours without waking, dreamless, silent. The hotel room quiet and anonymous and completely undistinguished and perfectly, blissfully without incident. She woke at 7:15, feeling something close to human. She cried in the shower. Relief, she told herself, just relief. She went home on November 16th. Her apartment was exactly as she'd left it. The pothos on the windowsill, the hopper print, the sage green walls, the corner. She made dinner. She watched television. She went to bed with all the lights on. At 3:14 a.m., the sound arrived from the corner, and it was the loudest it had ever been. And it had that quality now, the one from before, that last detail that had been the worst detail, that low thing underneath, that presence before the detonation. But this time, there was something else. This time, in the half-second before the sound, before her body snapped upright and her heart went into emergency protocol, she had the impression. She would not call it a certainty. She would not call it a sight. She would call it an impression of the corner not being empty. November became the thing she was going to have to get through. She started keeping a log, not because she thought it would help. She was past the point of interventions feeling helpful, but because it was something to do, some form of agency in a situation that had been progressively removing her options. She bought a small moleskin notebook and wrote the date and time of each occurrence and a brief description of the quality of the sound and any additional characteristics. The log for November reads like this. Nov 16, 3:14 a.m. Loud from corner, quality, impression of presence. Nov 17, 2:58 a.m. Very loud, corner. Nov 17, 4:22 a.m. Moderate, corner, quality, longer. Nov 18, 3:14 a.m. She stopped adding descriptions after November 18th because the descriptions were all the same, and writing them was making the thing more real in a way she couldn't afford. But she kept the log because not having the log felt worse. 3:14 a.m. It was always 3:14 a.m. or it wasn't when she checked. The times varied: 2:58, 3, 22, 4:01, all across the 3 to 4 a.m. range. But her memory, smoothing the data, kept returning it to 3:14. The impression of precision, the sense of schedule. She talked to a sleep specialist, Dr. Marcus Yoon, referred by Dr. Singh, who was more thorough than she'd expected and less satisfying. A sleep study was discussed, a questionnaire completed. Anxiety management techniques explored, CBTI, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, a program that was evidence-based and that Rachel did genuinely try. Lying in the dark doing the breathing exercises and the cognitive reframing and the sleep restriction protocol with the specific desperation of someone using a fire extinguisher on a fire that is coming from inside the walls. Dr. Yoon said he would refer her for an overnight sleep study. The appointment was in 3 weeks. 3 weeks is a long time when you are sleeping 3 hours a night. She started seeing the shape more clearly. She didn't tell Dr. Yoon that part. She didn't tell anyone that part. The way it had moved from impression to shape. The way the amber light, she'd upgraded to a full 60-watt bulb now. The room was well lit. She was past pretending that less light was more restful, showed her nothing in the corner except corner. But in that fraction of a second before the sound, when the threshold opened and something came through it, the impression of shape was becoming more specific. Not a person, not anything she had a category for. Something that occupied approximately 3 feet of vertical space in the lower right corner, below the level of the lampshade. Something that had been there, she was beginning to understand, since October 14th. Something that had been there, she was beginning to understand since before October 14th, and had only found a way to reach her on that particular Wednesday because of the particular combination of vulnerability, the melatonin, the anxiety, the sleep approach state, that had thinned the membrane at exactly the right moment. This was the thought she'd been keeping herself from completing for a month. She completed it now, sitting at the kitchen table at 4 a.m. with the moleskin open and a cup of tea going cold beside it. The sound had not created the presence. The sound was how the presence announced itself. She sat with this. She picked up the pen and wrote. It was there before I knew it was there. She put the pen down. She picked it up again and wrote. It was there before I moved in. The tea was cold. The apartment was quiet. The bedroom door was open, the full wattage lamp making the corner visible from where she sat. The corner was what it always was. A corner in a room in an apartment in Columbus, Ohio, where a woman with a pothos plant and a hopper print was sitting at the kitchen table at 4 a.m., finally understanding that what she'd been hearing every night was not her brain misfiring. It was a knock. She just hadn't known what was on the other side of the door. What you just heard was only the beginning. The sleep study happened on December 3rd. Rachel drove to the sleep clinic, a medical facility attached to a hospital on the east side of Columbus, unremarkable brick, the kind of building that looks exactly like what it is from the outside, and disappoints you with its practicality when you were secretly hopping for something more architecturally suited to the study of human darkness. And she checked in and was shown to a room that looked like a hotel room with extra wiring, and she lay in the unfamiliar bed in the unfamiliar room with electrodes attached to her scalp and her jaw and her legs, and was told to sleep normally. She slept normally. She slept 5 hours, the most consecutive sleep she'd had since October, without incident, and woke when the technician knocked at 6 a.m., and lay there for a moment feeling the specific bittersweet quality of having slept, which was wonderful in a place that was not her apartment, which meant the data would be clean and uninteresting. The EEG readout showed normal sleep architecture with some delayed onset. The EEG technician, a young woman named Jana who had the calm of someone who has watched many people sleep and found it largely unremarkable, said everything looked standard. No unusual activity, no anomalous brain events. Normal perfectly, uselessly normal. Dr. Yoon reviewed the results and said what she'd expected him to say. No seizure activity, no REM behavior disorder, normal hypnagogic transitions. He recommended continuing the CBTI program and reducing caffeine, and there it was managing anxiety. He said he was confident that the episodes would diminish over time. Rachel thanked him. She drove home. She stopped at a coffee shop. It was December. The city had its lights up. The early dark doing what early dark does in December, which is both oppressive and somehow beautiful in the way familiar seasonal things can be even when you don't want them to be. She drank the coffee sitting in the window. The street was full of people doing December things. She thought the test found nothing because there was nothing in the test to find. She thought the thing I'm trying to document is not in my brain. She drove home. She parked. She sat in the parking garage, cold concrete, motor oil for a while before going up. She'd had a month to prepare for this. She'd had a month of knowing that the clinical investigation would be clean and the conclusion would be benign, and she would still go home to the corner. She'd had time to make peace with the gap between what the science could offer and what she actually needed. What she needed was something the science had not been built to provide. An explanation not for the mechanism but for the why. Why this apartment? Why October 14th? Why the corner? Why 3:14 a.m.? Why her? She went upstairs. She made dinner. She moved through the apartment with the particular tenderness of someone who is getting ready to change something irreversible. She thought, I am going to sleep without the lights on tonight. She thought, I'm going to cross the threshold. She thought, I need to know what's on the other side. This was the last ordinary thought she would have for a long time. That was the last normal thought he would have. I do not use the word normal lightly. I use it the way one might use the word shore, while watching it disappear behind you. I have tried, I must tell you, I have tried with every instrument available to me to account for what followed through rational means. The lights were off. That much I can say with perfect confidence, and yet even in saying this I am aware that the sentence carries more significance than it appears. Off. The lights were off. The corner was dark. The room was dark. All of this was my own choice, and yet I find, looking back at it now, that it does not feel like a choice I made. It feels like a door I opened. But I am getting ahead of myself. I lay down, 10:30, December 3rd. I should establish this, a rational person. Have been always a rational person. The kind who looks up symptoms before calling the doctor. The kind who trusts documented studies over intuition. And I was aware of this about myself as I lay in the dark, which made the lying in the dark simultaneously harder and more necessary. If I was not able to lie in my own bedroom in the dark, I did not know what I was. Sleep came differently than it had in October. In October, sleep had been what it always was, the warm loosening, the kindly withdrawal of consciousness. This was not that. This was a descent, a distinctly different quality of approach, as though the threshold had changed shape, as though the door had moved and I was now what? Now standing where the door had been, finding only wall. I became aware of the corner. Not visually. The room was dark and I could not see the corner. I was aware of it the way one is aware of a sound in the next room, not heard exactly, but sensed. Its location was as precise to me as if the room had been lit. The lower right corner, the floor space, the meeting of the two walls, 3 feet vertical. The threshold was opening. I felt it open. This is what I mean when I say what happened next was not simply a dream, not simply a neurological misfire, not simply anything. I felt it with the specific clarity of something that was happening to me rather than in me. The approach to sleep, that boundary, that membrane, it was thinning, as it always does. But this time I was watching it thin. And something on the other side was watching it thin as well. I want to be precise. I need to be precise about what I mean by watching. There was no figure, no face. No, I am anticipating the question, the inevitable question that these accounts always produce, and I am telling you, no, there was no figure. There was a tension. The specific, particular, impossible to mistake quality of being observed. We are built to recognize it. 2 million years of evolution have calibrated the human nervous system to the exact signature of another consciousness directing itself toward you. It triggers the same cascade regardless of whether the eyes are visible. You simply know. The corner was watching me. I fell asleep anyway. I do not know if I can explain how this is possible. Exhaustion is a comprehensive tyrant. The body takes what it requires regardless of what the mind is telling it. I fell asleep with the corner watching me the way someone might fall asleep on a plane through turbulence, because the body's need was larger than the fear. I fell asleep, and the sound came. And now, I must ask you something. Not because I do not require anything from you. What I know regardless of whether it is acknowledged. But there is a particular madness, I tell you, in having lived through something real and finding oneself unable to locate anyone else who has lived through it. Anyone who will simply say, yes, I know. That is the thing. I have been there too. If you are still with me, if you have not yet turned away, if you have not closed this account and walked into some better lit room and made yourself a cup of something warm and told yourself, it was only words, write in the comments. The walls remember. That is all. 3 words. Let me know I am not alone in this. Because here is what the sound was on the night of December 3rd, which was the night I went in deliberately, eyes open, lights off, knowing. It was not a gunshot. It was not a cymbal crash. It had been those things the first time, the second time. Those were its introductory forms, its greeting perhaps, its first approximation of something I could process. The sound on December 3rd was I struggle. I have been struggling to name it for weeks now, and I find the same inadequacy each time. It was the sound of a large space becoming suddenly aware. That is as close as I can come. A large space becoming suddenly aware. As if the room, the air in the room, the dark, had not previously been paying attention, and now was. And the corner was. I have described it as watching, and I will stand by this. The corner had an orientation, a directionality, the specific quality of something that has been still for a long time and has just decided to move. I do not use the word decided lightly. I was sitting up. I was sitting up before I knew what I was. My body had made the decision for me, the ancient startle and assess override that has been overriding rational minds since before rational minds existed. The room was dark. My heart was going, that word again, not beating but going, as if it had somewhere to be. I turned on the light. The corner was empty. I sat in the full wattage light and looked at the corner, and the corner was what it had always been, and I thought, with a clarity that felt like something breaking rather than something arriving, you can't catch it with the light. The light doesn't see it. The light is for me. It doesn't care about the light. This was the revelation that the narrator, that I had been avoiding. The light was not a defense. The light was a security blanket. The light changed nothing except what I could see. And what I needed to see, what I had needed to see, had been trying to see for 6 weeks, was not something that was affected by whether the light was on or off. I will not burden this account with every night that followed. I cannot. The chronology has begun to deform in my memory, the way that memories deform under sustained pressure, and I am no longer fully certain of the sequence. I know this: December, the nights of December, the sound arriving each night with the specificity of a visitor who keeps a regular schedule. 3:14. I had thought this was my mind imposing pattern. I checked the log. December 4th, 3:14. December 5th, 3:11. December 7th, 3:14. December 8th, 3:14. December 8th again, 3:14. December 9th, 3:13. 3:14. 3:16. 3 times in a single night. What was happening to me, I need to be clear about this. I need to be clinically precise because I understand how this sounds. What was happening to me was not delusion. I was sleeping badly. I was anxious. I had lost weight, and I was tired in a way that sleep was no longer fully correcting, even on the nights when sleep managed to come. These are real symptoms, real and explicable, and the product of a documented sleep disorder. And then I was not, I need to say this directly, I was not, during any of this, unable to distinguish reality from unreality. I knew what was documented. I knew the medical explanation. I held both things simultaneously. The neuroscience, which was accurate and insufficient, and the thing I was experiencing, which was real and inexplicable. The sound had changed. That is the thing. Not in character, still percussive, still enormous, still singular, but in accompaniment. The quality I had first noticed in October, the thing I had almost called breathing, that was not breathing. I know now it was not breathing. Breathing is the sound of a living body maintaining itself, rhythmic and involuntary and warm. This was not warm. This was the sound of something that had found a door, that had been finding the door, testing the door, pressing against the door each night at the same time. That was now. The door was thinner. I could feel the thinning. That is what the approach to sleep was now. Not warmth, not release. The approach to the threshold felt like approaching something that was waiting for me to approach, that was timing itself to my approach. It was calling me across. But do not for one moment believe that you are simply listening to a story. What I am telling you is real. It has always been real. And the reason I know this, the reason I cannot stop, is that it is still happening. Right now, as I speak these words to you in the dark. And so my mind, what remained of it, turned at last to the question I had been circling for days. Not what had I seen, but what precisely had seen me. It is necessary, it has become necessary, to expand the frame of reference beyond the individual case, beyond the single apartment and the single woman and the singular, maddening, recurring event, and to ask a question that the clinical literature, bound as it is by the epistemological constraints of empirical methodology, has not been equipped to ask. The question is not, what generates the sound? The question is, what is the threshold and what is on the other side of it? The hypnagogic state, that liminal neural condition documented by Berger and extensively mapped by subsequent EEG research, represents, as previously described, a moment in which the brain's capacity to distinguish internal from external stimulus is temporarily compromised. The rational mind steps back. The ancient systems take primary processing responsibility. The self, in a very particular and technical sense, briefly dissolves. For the majority of the organism's history, the evolutionary majority, the billions of years of nervous system development that preceded the emergence of the prefrontal cortex, this dissolution was the normal state. The ancient brain did not maintain a hard boundary between self and environment. It was continuous with the dark. It felt everything in the dark as an extension of itself. What we call sleep onset is, in this framework, not the beginning of unconsciousness. It is the temporary cessation of the membrane that separates the individual mind from something far older and far larger. Dr. Alexei Voronov, Theoretical Neuroscience, Moscow State University, 2020. The question nobody in my field is asking is what that membrane is keeping out. We document the mechanism of sleep onset. We do not ask what was there before the mechanism developed. We assume the answer is nothing. This assumption has never been tested. The universe is, and I say this as someone who has spent a professional lifetime attempting to maintain clinical objectivity in the face of findings that do not permit clinical objectivity. The universe is not empty between minds. There is something there. There has always been something there. In the geological record, in the deep space observations, in the anomalous datasets of consciousness research, the same shape recurs. Something vast, something that has been present since before the first complex nervous system opened its first awareness, something that predates the distinction between self and world. Rachel Elms did not encounter something that had come from outside the building. She encountered something that had always been on the other side of the threshold, something that the hypnagogic brain, stripped of its rational filter, was briefly able to perceive is not the right word, resonate with. The way a tuning fork resonates with the frequency of its own note in the air. The question is, what tuned Rachel Elms's threshold to that particular frequency? The answer, which I arrive at with great reluctance and greater certainty, is nothing. Nothing tuned her. The frequency was already there. The threshold was already there. Every night for 34 years, she had been passing through the door that separates the self from the ancient dark, and the ancient dark had been patient. It is always patient. It has all the time that was before time began. What occupied the corner cannot be adequately described in the terminology of sensory experience, because it did not occupy the corner in the way that physical objects occupy space. It occupied. The corner is perhaps a metaphorical location, the nearest point of access between the room's atmosphere and something that extends, in directions for which human spatial geometry has no notation, through and beyond the room's physical boundaries. I have spoken to others who have described it, not many. The overlap between those who experience EHS with perceived external location and those who are willing to speak about what is actually perceived in the moment before the sound, the shape in the lower right corner, the presence in the specific quadrant, is small. The overlap is small because the willingness to describe it is small, because describing it requires acknowledging that the description matches. Here is what they say. Here is what I will attempt, with the understanding that the attempt is doomed and the attempt is nonetheless necessary. It has a weight, not physical weight, no object capable of physical measurement is present. But there is a distortion in the quality of the air in its vicinity, a compression, as though the space the corner occupies is in some way denser than the space around it, denser in a way that photons do not respond to, but the human nervous system, in its ancient configuration, does. It has a direction, not toward anything specific. More accurately, it has a facing. The way a face has a facing. The room is the thing it faces. You are the thing it faces. It does not have intentions in any sense that translates to human concepts of motivation. It does not want anything. This is the detail that is most difficult to live with. Things with wants are comprehensible. You can reason with wants. You can satisfy wants or resist them. What occupies the corner has no wants. It has presence. It has the presence of something that has existed in sufficient magnitude for sufficient duration that questions of want and need have become irrelevant. Vestigial. It knows the threshold. It has always known the threshold. The threshold is, it finds the threshold the way water finds cracks, not with intention, with inevitability. What generates the sound, the neurologist said, is the auditory cortex misfiring at sleep onset. But the auditory cortex does not misfire without cause. The auditory cortex fires when there is something to hear. The sound is not the sound of a brain misfiring. The sound is the brain doing the only thing the brain can do when it perceives something for which it has no category. It translates. It finds the nearest available analog in its existing experience, and it renders the untranslatable as a gunshot, a cymbal crash, a bomb, a speaker blown to catastrophic failure. The untranslatable thing hears the sound and knows it has been heard. And then it comes more often. The records exist. I'm not speaking metaphorically. I am speaking of actual records, filed in actual archives. The folklore traditions, the Kanashibari, the old hag, the shadow people, the corner presences of 100 indigenous traditions across 6 continents are records. They are records of what happens when the threshold thins and the ancient network behind it makes itself perceptible to a human nervous system that was never designed to withstand the perception. And they agree, these records, across the enormous span of their geographic and temporal separation, on several points that the clinical literature has not yet been forced to address. First, it comes from a fixed location, the corner, the doorway, the space beside the bed. Second, once it has found you, it returns. The location does not change. The schedule does not change. The nature of the contact, that enormous, sourceless sound, that quality before the sound, that weight in the specific quadrant does not change. Third, in every tradition, there is a threshold phenomenon attached to escalation, something that tips the relationship from occasional contact to sustained attention. The traditions describe it differently. The hag presses harder each night. The Kanashibari entity makes itself more fully visible. The corner presence in the documented EHS cases begins to. The Sharpless study's most buried finding, published in a table, not discussed in the paper's conclusions. Table 4. Row 23. Among subjects reporting perceived external location of EHS event, 14% report awareness of visual component concurrent with auditory event. Of these, 89% describe visual component as localized to area of perceived auditory origin. 14% of those who hear the sound from the corner also see something in the corner. 14% of that group confirm the location every time. The table footnote. Visual component descriptions varied significantly. Detailed analysis beyond the scope of current study. Beyond the scope. Beyond the scope because the descriptions, if collated, if placed beside one another, if stripped of the clinical distance that has been keeping them apart, the descriptions would form a shape. The same shape. And the shape is not a sleep paralysis figure, not a hypnagogic hallucination of the type categorized by the literature. not anything that fits inside the existing taxonomies. The shape is something that has been waiting with extraordinary patience, with the patience of geological time, with the patience of the ancient dark that predates the first dream and will outlast the last waking, for enough thresholds to thin simultaneously that it can finally be seen from enough angles to be fully apprehended. We are 10% of the population. That is a very large number of thresholds. That is a very large number of corners. Whatever it is very close to fully visible. What you just heard was only the beginning. The threshold is not an individual feature of individual minds. This is the thing. This is the understanding that represents the final, irreversible alteration in how I see the architecture of consciousness. And I arrived at it through a process of scholarly investigation that I would categorize, if I were being honest, as a progressive dismantling of the assumptions that had previously made the world navigable. The threshold between waking and sleeping is shared infrastructure, the same mechanism, the same door. Every human mind passes through it every night. We pass through it separately, in our separate rooms and our separate cities and our separate centuries, but we pass through the same space. The hypnagogic territory is not individual territory. It is communal in a way that makes the word communal seem almost comically inadequate. It is the largest shared space in human existence. And the thing that is on the other side of it, the thing that Pierce's patients were admitting to with such shame in 1988, the thing that Daniel Katz sealed into a closet in Portland, the thing that found Rachel Elms's apartment in Columbus on a Wednesday in October, that thing is not local. It is not in a corner of a room in Ohio. The corner is a rendering, a projection, the nearest point of contact, the place where the membrane is, for reasons specific to this room or this person or this configuration, most thin. Behind every corner, in every bedroom, in every apartment where someone is lying in the dark at 3 a.m., not quite asleep and not quite awake, the same space, the same vast, patient, ancient space, looking at its 10%. What has been described thus far represents only the outermost fragment of the truth, the portion that human language can approximate. What lies beneath that layer, what the deepest accounts suggest, is something for which no preparation is adequate. Nothing that follows can be unheard. You were warned. I began in December to research the corner. I know how this sounds, and I do not care how this sounds. I had been through the neurological literature. I had been through the clinical studies. I had been through the sleep forums and the Wikipedia article and the 3 weeks of CBTI breathing exercises. I had been to the sleep clinic and had my brain mapped in the night and been told it was normal. Everything was normal. The normal explanation did not fit the normal evidence. That was what I kept returning to. If the sound was a brain misfire, the brain would misfire in different locations. The brain would misfire differently. The brain's misfires do not keep a schedule. They do not come from the same point in space every time. They do not have that quality, that weight, that presence before the sound. So I researched the corner. I found the building records. The apartment was built in 2003. I found the building permits. I found the city records. The site had been a house previous, demolished 1998. Before the house, before 1968, a different residential structure. Before that, the land records indicated industrial use, 1920s through 1940s. A distribution facility of some kind, city records unclear. I printed everything I could find. I taped it to the kitchen wall. I understand how this looks. I had been sleeping 3 hours a night for 6 weeks, and I was printing city property records at 2 a.m. and tapping them to the kitchen wall. Obsession is not irrational when there is a real thing to be obsessed with. That is what I need to say. That is the distinction I was holding on to. I was not obsessing over nothing. I was obsessing over something. The something was real. The something came from the corner at 3:14 a.m., and I had been documenting it for 6 weeks. and the documentation was consistent and coherent. And if the thing I was investigating had not had the quality of being perceived only during hypnagogic transition, if it had been visible during daylight hours, if it had left a physical mark, if it had made a sound that my neighbor could hear through the walls, nobody would be suggesting I was losing my mind. I was not losing my mind. I was finding a thing my mind could not hold without changing shape. By December 15th, I had stopped trying to sleep before 3 a.m. This was not strategic. This was the natural consequence of an arithmetic. I lay in the dark and I felt the threshold open, and I did not want to cross it. Not because of the sound was only the sound. I was past the sound. I did not want to cross the threshold because crossing the threshold meant proximity. It meant meeting it halfway. And I had, in the weeks of lying awake listening toward the corner, in the nights of sitting up afterward with the full wattage lamp, and the kitchen chair I had moved into the bedroom so I could sit facing the corner directly, in the process of researching and documenting and pressing closer. I had crossed a line I had not identified as a line until I was already on the other side of it. I was not afraid of the corner anymore. I wanted to understand it. This is what I need you to understand as the most dangerous moment, the most dangerous reorientation. Fear is protective. Fear keeps you in the lit room. Fear keeps you on the shore. What replaced fear in me, what moved into the space fear vacated, was a hunger that had more in common with the thing in the corner than with anything I had previously recognized as my own motivation. I wanted to know what it was. I wanted to know it the way you want the next word when you've heard the first one. The way you want the last page of a book you should have put down but can't. The wanting was its own form of contamination, and I felt it, and I could not make myself stop feeling it. I began sleeping without the light on again. I began lying in the dark and letting the threshold open fully and staying on the edge of it, not crossing, not sleeping, but not retreating either, and waiting for it to get closer. It got closer. I will say what I have been avoiding saying. On December 19th, I know the date is exact, I crossed the threshold. Not sleep, not the ordinary crossing. I know what that feels like, the warmth, the loosening, and this was not that. This was a deliberate and active volition. I lay in the dark and I felt the threshold, and I chose to push through it rather than let it take me. And for I cannot tell you how long. Clocks do not function correctly in that space. I can tell you that I was aware of being in two places simultaneously. I was in my body, in my bed, in the apartment, the sage green walls invisible in the dark, the streetlight's thin orange line along the curtain. And I was in a space that was not bounded by those walls, not bounded by anything I had a word for. And the thing that had been in the corner was not in the corner, was not localized to a corner or a room or a building or a city or a country, was present the way gravity is present, everywhere continuous, a property of the space rather than an object within it. And it was aware of me, yes, the awareness I had been feeling from the corner, yes, but the awareness was not specific to me. It was the awareness of something that perceives everything in its range simultaneously, and I was in its range. And everyone sleeping that night was in its range, and everyone who had ever slept was in its range, and the range had no edges. I will tell you what I understood in that space that I cannot fully hold in daylight. It has always been there, before the first human dreamer, before the first complex nervous system, before the formation of the planet that contains the bedroom in Columbus, Ohio, where I lay with my eyes open in the dark. The universe generated consciousness, generated these brief, fragile, warm, mortal minds, and the consciousness generated thresholds, and the thresholds generated a door, and the door opened both ways. It has been using the door since the first door existed. We call it a sleep disorder. The sentence I have been avoiding. It is not interested in harming us. It is interested in us the way we are interested in a phenomenon, an anomaly in an otherwise predictable system. These brief, terrified, dreaming things. These things that light up and go dark every 8 hours, that scream at the sound of contact, that tape property records to their kitchen walls and turn on every light they own and still lie in the dark and still go looking. We are fascinating to it. Our fear is fascinating. Our investigation is fascinating. Right now, somewhere, it is finding that fascinating. Enough of the theoretical, enough of the academic distance. What was found in that room deserves to be described as it was, in full, in light, with nothing hidden. The body tells the truth when the mind has stopped being capable of it. Rachel Elms, 34 years old, had lost 11 pounds in 8 weeks. The weight loss showed in her face first, the specific hollowness that comes not from dieting but from sustained deprivation, from the body consuming itself because the external supply has become unreliable. The skin under her eyes had a texture like thin paper, slightly translucent. The vessels beneath showed blue. Her hands had developed a tremor, small, inconsistent, the kind that comes from a nervous system that has been in emergency mode for too long and is beginning to show the metabolic cost. She was beautiful in a way she had never been before. This is not a kind thing to say. It is a precise thing. There is a beauty that arrives in people when they are being consumed, a burnishing, an illumination from within, as though something inside them has been lit and is running hot. It is the beauty of a thing being used up. The candle at maximum output in the minutes before it runs to the end of its wick. She had stopped sleeping with the lights on. She had stopped keeping the log. She had stopped calling Mara, had stopped going to Dr. Yoon's follow-up appointments, had stopped doing the CBTI breathing exercises that she had taken with her into the dark and breathed through with her hand on her chest, and the corner watching, and the threshold thinning. She was on the other side of the threshold, more often than not. This is what that looked like from the body's perspective. Chronic sleep deprivation with hypnagogic intrusion, elevated cortisol sustained for weeks, hippocampal stress response, hyperactivation of the amygdala's threat detection systems, which had been running a continuous search for the target of the threat and had been continuously unable to find it. Because the target was not in any physical location, the amygdala's evolutionary training had prepared it to search. The body knew something was wrong before any instrument could confirm it. The body had been knowing for weeks. The body was writing the knowledge in its own tissue. The hollowness, the tremor, the thin paper skin, the vessels showing blue. The body was becoming a record of what was happening at 3:14 a.m. She sat in her bedroom on December 19th, late past midnight, on the chair she had moved from the kitchen. The room was dark. The chair faced the corner. She had not moved the chair since placing it there. She sat in it every night now. The chair facing the corner at the end of a room in a city in the middle of a country in the middle of a night that contained, outside its windows, millions of other rooms with their own corners and their own thresholds and their own 3 a.m. The corner was what it was, 2 walls meeting. The hamper moved weeks ago, leaving only the floor. The floor was clean. The corner was empty. The corner was full. That is not a contradiction. What filled it was not anything that produced a shadow. Photons moved through the space where it was with complete indifference, bouncing off the walls, doing exactly what photons do in empty corners. The light sensors in Rachel's eyes reported nothing unusual. The higher-order visual processing areas of her cortex, when she looked at the corner in the half-second before sleep, reported something else entirely. The shape that had been growing more specific for 8 weeks, not a figure in any human sense, not a configuration of limbs and features organized in a way that called up any category she had a name for. But the word shape is accurate in the way that the word weight was accurate, as a description of perceptual reality rather than physical reality. 3 feet vertical, in the lower half of the corner, dense in a way that did not translate to vision, present in a way that her body, her honest, truth-telling, consuming body, responded to with the full ancient cascade. Heart rate up, cortisol up, breath shallow, pupils wide. The threshold opened. She felt it open. She had learned to feel it the way you learn to feel a change in air pressure before weather. The sound came at 3:14 a.m., and it was the largest it had ever been. A detonation so total it seemed to have a structural component, seemed to shake something at a frequency below hearing. And in the millisecond of the sound, she could see it directly. The full wattage lamp off and the room dark and her eyes fully dilated. Not the shape approximated through hypnagogic processing, but the thing itself. And it was not. She turned on the light. Her hand was steady, which surprised her. The lamp was at full brightness in under a second, and the corner was empty, and she was sitting in the kitchen chair with her heart somewhere in the vicinity of her throat, and she was, in some way she did not have words for, changed. She had seen it. It had been seen. This was not an ending. This was a relationship. Here is what it wants. This is the question Rachel had been living with for 2 months without being able to ask it directly, without being able to move past the immediate experience, the sound, the location, the frequency, to the larger question of motivation. What does it want with her specifically? What does it want with any of the 10%? The answer, which arrived in the space after the largest sound, in the strange aftermath of having been seen and having seen, is not what she expected. It does not want to harm her. This is the thing that is simultaneously the most reassuring and most disturbing truth about what she is dealing with. Not reassuring because harm was the only bad option. Disturbing because what it actually wants is worse in a way that harm is not. Harm has an end. What it actually wants is contact, continued contact, the experience of finding one of the briefly lit things, these warm mortal minds in their fragile bodies in their corners of the universe, and maintaining proximity to the brief illumination. The way you sit near a fire when the rest of the world is cold, not consuming the fire, just near it, finding the warmth real. It finds us interesting. It has always found us interesting. Billions of years of existence without the particular quality that consciousness introduces, the interiority, the first-person experience of being oneself inside a universe that exists outside oneself. And then, these tiny temporary things, terrified and curious simultaneously, running away and running toward, screaming and tape recording the scream. She is not the only one it is with. She never has been. The 10%, the people lying in their dark rooms right now, hearing their particular version of the detonation from their particular corner, are all in their individual dark, having some version of this contact. Most of them will never know. Most will have it once or twice and file it under strange thing that happened and move on. Their thresholds will reseal, and the contact will end, and they will spend the rest of their lives carrying the brief impression of something vast and old and curious that pressed its attention against them for a few nights in a row, and then moved on. Rachel's threshold did not reseal. This is the extraordinary and terrible specificity of her situation. The threshold had been propped open by the investigation, by the weeks of deliberate approach, by the December night of voluntary crossing. She had not just been perceived, she had perceived back, and what she perceived back was large enough, specific enough, attended to enough, that she had created something the contact does not usually generate: reciprocity. It is fascinated by her. She is fascinated by it. This is not a horror story. It is a love story in a genre that doesn't have that word for it yet. The beautiful monster is not a monster. The beautiful monster is a vast, pre-biological network of consciousness that found a door in her brain at 3:14 a.m. on a Wednesday in October, and has been pressing its attention through the door every night since, because she is the most interesting thing it has found at this particular corner of the universe. And she, despite the weight loss and the tremor and the thin paper skin, she finds it equally, increasingly, terrifyingly interesting. She put down the notebook she'd been writing this in. She looked at the corner. The corner was dark. The lamp was off. She had turned the lamp off. She couldn't remember turning the lamp off. The last entry in the Moleskine notebook is dated December 21st, the winter solstice, longest night of the year, which is not the kind of detail Rachel would normally have noted, but which she noted in the margin of the entry, in handwriting less regular than her usual. The longest night, as if the darkness had scheduled itself to be present at full capacity. The entry reads in its entirety, "It isn't in the corner anymore." 4 words. Below it in smaller handwriting the clarification, "It's everywhere in the room. The corner was where it came in. It's not in the corner anymore." Below that, "I don't think I can call Mara. I don't think I can describe this to someone who hasn't." The sentence is unfinished. The final line of the entry, written vertically in the margin, slightly slanted as though written without looking at the page. "I can feel it when I'm awake now." Mara called on December 22nd. Rachel picked up. She sounded, Mara would later say, like herself, not distressed, not flat, just slightly, far away, Mara said. Like talking to someone in a loud place who is hearing you but their attention is partly elsewhere. They talked for 20 minutes. Rachel said she was fine. She said the sleep thing had gotten better, which was technically not a lie. She was sleeping better now, more deeply, waking less often to the sound, and she said she'd been thinking about coming to visit in January. And Mara said she'd love that, and they talked about Felix's cookbooks and Rachel's mother's book club, the normal things, the shore. After she hung up, Rachel sat in the bedroom. The lamp was off. The room was dark at 2 p.m. She had put blackout curtains on the windows, not to block the light for sleep. She was past that. She was sleeping fine now, but because the daylight had started to feel like interference. The quality of the dark in the room was becoming preferable. This was the change she had not told anyone about. Not Mara, not Dr. Singh, not Dr. Yoon. This was the change that she was aware of in the way you're aware of a shift in temperature, not dramatic, not sudden, but unmistakable once you'd noticed it and impossible to unnotice. She preferred the dark. She preferred the approach to sleep, the threshold, the opening. She was increasingly more herself on the other side of the threshold than on this side. The vast old thing in the room, no longer in the corner, everywhere now, like weather, was not consuming her. It was not replacing her. It was adjacent to her, continuous with her, the way a river is continuous with the water that flows into it from a creek. The creek does not cease to exist. The creek becomes part of something larger. The tremor in her hands had stopped. She had stopped losing weight. Her face in the mirror had a quality she hadn't seen in it before, a stillness, a quality of depth, as though there was more behind her eyes than there had been in October. She reached for the lamp and stopped. She thought, "I don't need it." She sat in the full dark of the solstice afternoon with the blackout curtains blocking the winter light and the threshold between her and the universe fully, permanently, irreversibly open. And she was not afraid. And that was the most terrifying thing that had happened to her since October 14th. This is the part that was edited out, cut from every version you have ever encountered, because someone decided you could not handle the truth of what was found in that place. They were trying to be kind. I am not going to be kind. You asked for the truth. Here it is. What you just heard was only the beginning. Mara came to Columbus in January. She did not come for a planned visit. She came because she had called 3 times in the last week of December and gotten voicemail each time, and the return texts had been brief, fine, busy, catch up soon, in a way that had a quality she couldn't name except to say, it didn't sound like Rachel. And Mara had been knowing Rachel for 12 years, and she had learned to trust her own sense of what Rachel sounded like. She drove up on a Thursday. She had a key, had always had a key, and when she let herself in at 10 a.m., the apartment was dark. Not dark because the lights were off, dark because the windows were covered. Every window in the apartment had heavy curtains drawn, some reinforced with what appeared to be folded fabric. The living room was navigable in a dim way, enough light leaked around the edges to see by. The kitchen had its overhead light on. Normal. A coffee mug on the counter, recently used. Rachel, Myra called. In here, from the bedroom. Myra pushed the bedroom door open. The room was dark except for the faint edgelight around the curtains. In the dark, she could see Rachel sitting in the kitchen chair that had been moved to the center of the room and was facing the corner, and she was fine. She looked fine. Better than she'd looked in November, actually. Clearer, calmer, the weight back, the hollowness gone. A stillness about her that Mara would describe later as like someone who has been somewhere and come back. Hey, Rachel said. She sounded like herself, mostly. Are your curtains covering the windows? I like the dark. Mara sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her friend in the dark and said, Are you okay? Rachel considered this for a moment with the particular seriousness of someone who is taking the question more literally than it was intended. I'm changed, she said finally. Not okay or not okay, changed. Changed how? Rachel looked at the corner for a moment, then back at Mara. I went somewhere, she said. At sleep. I went somewhere and I came back, and some of what's over there came back with me. And I don't think it's going to stop. And I think I'm okay with that. Mara sat on the bed in the dark apartment and felt, she would later say, as if the room were very slightly larger than it appeared. As if it contained more space than its dimensions should have permitted. As if the corner Rachel had been looking at was deeper than a corner. She opened the curtains. The January light came in, flat and white, and the apartment was an apartment again. And Rachel blinked and looked at the light with an expression that Mara could not categorize and would spend a long time afterward trying to. That is what happened to the body. Now I will tell you what happened to the record. January 14 th, Columbus, Ohio. Case file YOONMARCUS MD. Follow-up notes. Patient, Rachel Elms, 34, female. Representation following missed follow-up appointments December 2023. Presenting in January 2024 at the insistence of accompanying friend, Mara Akafer. Contact listed. Clinical notes. Patient presents well-nourished and appropriately groomed. Affect calm, near flat. Describes resolution of acute EHS episodes. Sounds reported as now infrequent, less intense. Sleep quality reported as significantly improved, 7-8 hours per night. Reports no current distress. Of note, patient describes persistent alteration in sleep architecture. Reports difficulty achieving or maintaining full wakefulness during standard daytime hours. Reports preference for darkened environments. Reports ongoing awareness of hypnagogic state boundaries, which she describes as continuous rather than episodic. Neurological referral recommended. Discussed with patient. Patient declined. Outcome: patient discharged with recommendation to contact clinic if symptoms worsen. Note: Dr. Yoon flagged file for follow-up in 3 months. Dr. Yoon's handwritten note attached to the file. Something's different, not worse. Different. Couldn't get her to articulate it. She was cooperative, lucid, appropriate. But there's a quality to her, a distance that wasn't there in October. I've been doing this 14 years. I don't have a clinical term for what I'm looking at. Mara Akafer, 33, Marketing Director, Cincinnati, Ohio. January 2024. She's fine. That's what I keep coming back to. She's fine. She's functional and she's warm and she's still herself in all the ways that count. She called me last week and we talked for an hour about completely normal things. She's got a new project at work. She's been reading more. She went to her parents for Christmas and her mom said she seemed peaceful. But there's a but. When she's quiet, when the conversation pauses, she gets this look, like she's listening to something I can't hear. Like there's another conversation happening at the same frequency and she's tracking both. I asked her about it once and she said, it's like there's always a window open now. I didn't know what that meant. She smiled when I said that. The smile was Rachel's smile, but it was fuller than it used to be, like there was more behind it. I don't know what that means. I don't know how to file it. End witness account. Mara Akafer continues to visit Rachel monthly. She reports the window quality has persisted. Rachel Elms is not the only one. September 2021, Chicago, Illinois. Marcus Webb, 27, software engineer. EHS onset following job change and move to new apartment. Episodes escalated to nightly over 6 weeks. Subsequent alteration, described to his neurologist as a reorganization of his relationship to sleep. Now employed remotely. Keeps irregular hours. Has not rescheduled neurological follow-up. March 2022, Edinburgh, Scotland. Surname withheld. Female, 51. EHS onset following retirement and geographic relocation. Episodes presenting external location from first occurrence, always the top of the landing. Frequency escalated to multiple nightly events. Current status, moved back to previous city. Reports episodes have ceased. Declined further interview. Her letter to the sleep clinic on file. I'm not comfortable providing further detail. I would ask that you not contact me again. August 2023, Sydney, Australia. James Akwu, 44. Accountant. EHS onset following period of insomnia related to professional stress. 5-month escalation. Current status, obtained through third-party report. Mr. Akwu took a leave of absence from his firm in November 2023. He is reportedly well. He has not returned to his previous apartment. He has been contacted by a researcher at the University of Sydney Sleep Medicine Department and has declined to participate. The sleep medicine researcher, Dr. Priya Kaur, filed a note in her research log, third declination this quarter. In each case, Melbourne, Perth, Sydney, the subject presents as well and functional. In each case, the subject declines to discuss the period of escalation or the subsequent alteration. In each case, the phrase used to decline is a variation on the same language. I'd rather not go back to it. Not. I'd rather not discuss it. Back. The spatial metaphor. Back to it. As though it is a place. The most recent documented case, February 2026, a subject in Vancouver, British Columbia, who experienced EHS onset in October 2025 and escalated to nightly in December. Current status as of this recording, ongoing. The subject has been in contact with an online community of 340 members who describe the same escalation and the same subsequent alteration. 340 people in a community that has existed for 2 years, which represents a fraction of the 10%. The date closest to today, this morning, someone somewhere woke at 3:14 a.m. to the sound from the corner and lay back down and listened for what came after. The last known survivor account, not a survivor in the dramatic sense, not someone who escaped, because there is no evidence that escape is possible or that escape is what is needed. The last person who saw it fully and came back to the side of the threshold that has words. Name Dr. A.L. Faris, research psychiatrist, age 61 at time of account, former faculty, Stanford Sleep Research Center, resigned from faculty position November 2022. Dr. Faris was not a sufferer. She was a researcher who had been investigating EHS for 11 years, had published 14 papers, had interviewed more than 600 subjects. She was rigorous, credentialed, published in peer-reviewed journals, and by all accounts of her colleagues, profoundly sane. She began in 2022 to experience EHS herself. She published one final paper on the phenomenology of hypnagogic encounter, a first-person account, submitted October 2022, rejected by 4 journals before appearing in a small open-access sleep science publication, in which she attempted to describe, with the full instrument of her clinical training, what was happening to her. The paper's final section, titled "The Question I Cannot Answer," reads in summary, "After 11 years of clinical distance from this phenomenon, I find myself unable to maintain that distance. What I have described in 600 subject interviews, the external location, the consistent corner, the quality of presence before the sound, I am now experiencing directly. And what my training did not prepare me for is the following. It is not disturbing. It is not distressing. It is the most real thing I have ever experienced. And the realness is the problem, because the realness sits in absolute contradiction with everything the clinical model has told me about what this is. Her last recorded words on the subject, given in an informal voice memo to a colleague, November 2022, 3 days before she resigned. I'm not in danger. I want you to be clear on that. I'm not sick. I'm not losing my mind. What I'm losing, what I've already lost, is the ability to believe that the membrane is all there is, that the threshold is the edge, that the only thing on the other side is a misfiring auditory cortex and a good night's sleep. Something is there. It has always been there. I'm going to spend some time being near it. She has not published since. She is by all accounts well. She does not return emails about her research. Current status: EHS is classified by the International Classification of Sleep Disorders, 3rd edition, under the category of sleep-related sensory disturbances, subcategory Other. It is listed as benign. Treatment options noted: reassurance, stress management, sleep hygiene. No pharmacological intervention established as effective. Research funding allocated to EHS in the last 5 years. Less than 2% of total sleep disorder research budgets in the United States and United Kingdom combined. The 42% external location finding from the 2015 survey, cited in 7 subsequent papers. In each citation, it is noted and no analysis is offered. It remains, in the current literature, an unexplained anomaly. The 14% visual component finding from the Sharpless data, not cited in any subsequent paper. The cross-description comparison, what was seen by those 14% in the specific corner from which the sound appeared to originate, has never been compiled. The data exists in individual records. It has not been assembled. Dr. Miranda Shaw, Consciousness Studies, University of Toronto, 2023. I left sleep medicine because I could not continue publishing within a framework that was systematically excluding the most interesting data. Not fraudulently, not with malice. The framework simply couldn't hold it. The 42%, the 14%, the cross-cultural location consistency, the alteration in subjects' cases, these are not outliers. These are the heart of the phenomenon, and the heart of the phenomenon is not benign in the sense of harmless. It's benign in the sense of unstoppable. End expert record. Dr. Shaw declined to elaborate. She is, according to her university profile, currently on research leave. The document that should not exist but does. A 47-page unpublished manuscript circulating in a small community of EHS researchers and subjects. Author unnamed. Titled The Threshold Survey. Collected testimonies. 2019-2024. The manuscript collates first-person accounts from 340 subjects who have experienced EHS escalation and subsequent alteration. The accounts are in 23 languages. They describe the same progression: onset, escalation, external location, quality of presence, voluntary crossing, alteration. The alteration. The thing that follows the full crossing, that no clinical paper has been built to describe. The window staying open. The threshold becoming permanent. The vast and patient and curious old thing on the other side of every bedroom in the world. Every dark room, every corner, every 3:14 a.m. Finding one of the briefly lit things that actually looked back. The manuscript's final line. We are not the first to have the door opened. We will not be the last. The sleep researchers who have read it describe it as compelling but unverifiable. 3 of them have left sleep medicine since reading it. Rachel called her mother in February. They talked for 40 minutes. Her mother's book club had finished the book they'd been reading. Her father had finished the deck. The Pothos Rachel's mother asked about the Pothos was doing well, still thriving. Her mother said she sounded good. Rachel said she was good. Her mother said she sounded different. Not bad different, just different. Rachel said she'd been sleeping better. Her mother said that was good. Sleep was everything. She always said sleep was everything. Rachel said yes. The apartment was tidy. The curtains were open now. She'd opened them in January after Mara's visit. The winter light came in, flat and white. The Pothos was on the windowsill. The Hopper print was on the wall. The sage green of the bedroom walls was the same color she'd painted it. The corner was empty. She kept the kitchen chair in the bedroom. She hadn't moved it back. She went to bed at 11. She lay in the dark. The streetlight made its thin orange line along the curtain. The apartment was quiet. The October kind of quiet, which was strange because it was February, but that was how it felt, the early dark and the silence. She closed her eyes. The threshold opened. She crossed. In the morning, she woke at 7:15 and made coffee, and went to work and answered her emails, and talked to her coworker James about a project and ate lunch with Mara, who had come up from Cincinnati for the day. And Mara watched her across the table and found nothing wrong and everything slightly different, and did not know how to say this. The books were still on the floor of the corner. She had never picked them up. Ann Patchett was still on top. She had never read it. She no longer needed to. What has occurred in the apartment of Rachel Elms, and in the apartment of Daniel Katz, and in the childhood bedroom of patient F, and in the resignation letter of Dr. Farris, and in the final voice memo recorded in a parking garage in Stanford, California, on a Thursday in November 2022. What has occurred in all of these places, and in all of the places that have not been documented and will not be documented, and are not yet known, is not, by any reasonable framework I can construct, a tragedy. It is a contact event. The universe is, we are told by physicists, 13.8 billion years old. The first complex nervous systems developed, we are told by biologists, approximately 540 million years ago. The first human dreams are, by conservative archaeological estimate, approximately 300,000 years in operation. Whatever is on the other side of the threshold has had considerably longer. The horror of exploding head syndrome is not that the brain misfires. The horror is the possibility, supported by the clinical data, supported by the cross-cultural record, supported by the 340 testimonies in an unpublished manuscript that nobody will formally acknowledge, that the brain does not misfire at all, that the brain, at its most ancient and most exposed, is doing precisely what it was built to do. Detecting the presence of a consciousness too large for the category of presence, rendering, in the only sensory vocabulary available to it, the sound of a contact it was never designed to survive intact. Rachel Elms is intact. By every available measure. By every available measure, she is fine. Something on the other side of her threshold, the vast, pre-biological, patient thing that was curious about the briefly lit warm mortal minds in their corners of the universe, found one that looked back. That is not a tragedy. That is not a horror story. That is the universe doing what it has always done, in the dark, at the precise moment you let your guard down, at the exact moment you trust your own brain completely and close your eyes and breathe out in. Second half POE. Deep breath. And I who have been telling you this, I who have been the voice of the academic and the voice of the rational and the voice of the documented record, I am telling you this from a particular vantage point that I have not yet named. I am telling you this from the kitchen chair, in the bedroom, in the dark, with the threshold open. And what I know now, what I have come to know through the weeks and the months of investigation, through the nights of lying in the amber light, and then the dark light and then no light at all, through the moment of crossing and the vast space on the other side and the curiosity that came back with me through the door, what I know is this. The survey of 340 subjects is accurate. The cross-cultural record is accurate. The 42% figure is accurate and insufficient. The thing that occupies the corner is real and present and patient and not going anywhere. And it is not only in my corner. It is in yours. You lay down tonight. You will lie down tonight. The threshold will open, as it always does, as it has always done, without your permission or your preparation. The melatonin and the familiar podcast and the streetlight's thin orange line along the curtain and the warm loosening, and the edges of the self going soft, and then that sound, that enormous, sourceless, impossible sound. From the corner, from the same corner. You have been hearing that sound your whole life, and you have been calling it nothing, and nothing is not its name.